Hello, this is Dr. Don Lynch, and I want to talk to you about ministry as representation of Jesus, especially in the wake of what has happened with one of our rather famous, worldwide famous, and internationally acclaimed apologists and evangelical leaders who has been exposed after his death of having participated in immoral and adulterous activities of a sexual nature for many years. See, when we enter into ministry, we become a representative of Jesus. So we do not enter a vocation so that our measurement of success comes with performance standards that have been written by churchism or church growthism or by popularity. Our influence is not measured in numbers. So we do not enter employment or become the subject of a contractual agreement governed by institutions. We become a direct representative of Jesus. Now, while there is not a higher calling, as Roman Catholic thinking separated the secular from the sacred and created this monstrous gap between the professionals and the laity. We don't have this. What we do have is a life defined by representation, not just a performance of preaching or the particular preparations of seminary, then honed and professionalized at a much higher level so that our voice becomes more palatable or persuasive at the expense of our soul. We represent Jesus. We cannot separate the personality of the kingdom leader from his ministry, nor can we separate his intimacy and his personal life. It is everyone's business how you live if you represent Jesus. And that is true of every kingdom citizen who must be held accountable, and there must be a point at which your intimate life is accountable for its representation. You cannot say that it's nobody's business how you live. This is like the direct opposite of kingdom order and representing Jesus. It is in fact lawlessness, or the very spirit of Antichrist and Satan himself whispering in your ear. We enter into a lifestyle of leadership which demands, as Paul said to Timothy, that we be an example of the believers in word, that is our speech and our lifestyle. Conversation in your King James Version means how you live. And so we have this glaring inconsistency now exposed by a man with, amazing historic levels of professional performance. One whose ministry integrity in terms of messaging has been internationally received and historic in its influence, yet at the same time now lies, as it were, pushed off a cliff and in complete shattered pieces because of a long, sordid, and embarrassing fatal flaw. We don't become super saints because we can perform well in a pulpit or do well with a microphone. And we aren't just representatives of Jesus in our messaging. We must be representatives of Jesus in our lifestyles. While this doesn't require that we be perfect, and many people, in fact, say there's no higher standard for those who are kingdom leaders, they're wrong. They're wrong because leaders lead, and because leaders have influence. Leadership in its most basic form is influence. And as I classically say, Satan will be happy for your strengths to get stronger as long as your weaknesses are getting weaker. You must lead with your strengths, but you must be intentional with your weaknesses. That is, there must be a purposeful, intentional, consistent, constant monitoring of your accountable issues. Your lifestyle should be an open book to someone. There should be a carefully designed and consistently followed behavior in which you are humbled, submitted, and opened to someone looking you in the eye and asking you questions without any part of your life being off limits. We represent Jesus, and therefore we enter into a lifestyle of leadership demanding an example to all the believers. So stop right now, kingdom leader. Examine your accountability strategy. I do consistently monitor my own strategy for accountability because I am not the one who makes me the most accountable. I spend a lot of money and I invest a lot of time, quality time, not time I just happen to have left over. I invest priority time and money in putting myself in front of people who I know are going to bring me into accountability for the intimate details of my life. Are you? Consider if you have made yourself accountable for the most intimate aspects of your personal integrity and moral purity. Or, let me just ask some really pointed questions. Have you set things up? Are the people who are supposedly holding you to an account family who have done a great job of helping you cover up things rather than deal with the fatal flaw that could some way and someday cause everything that you've ever done to come into question? As I say, Satan is happy for your strength to get stronger as long as your weaknesses are getting weaker, because he knows there'll come a point at which your weaknesses will discredit your strengths. Do you only allow peer-level friends to speak into your life and measure your performance, continuously listening for their affirmations? Or are there people who are dependent upon you for money who are the measurement of your accountability? The yes men that you demand, who live off your prestige, therefore wish to maintain your prestige. People with leverage in your life or leveraged by your life and popularity, whose eyes are on ministry expansion, perhaps on the bank account balances. People without the capacity to discern, to discuss, to discover, or even to detail what's going on in your life. The people who work for you know that standing in front of you and saying it's not a good idea for you to be visiting those massage parlors because they reckon, not the massage parlors within themselves were the issue here, and I'm not blaming the women who were the victims of this evangelical leader's behaviors. Rather, I would say they've let it go on for a long time and got a lot of money from it, and now suddenly they want to scream abuse, which to me seems irreconcilable. And the leverage that these women, of course, have is massive because of the international acclaim of this leader. So they are victims, but willing victims, and victims who could have and should have spoken up. Or perhaps I should say the same thing about them as I'm saying about how you've adjusted your accountability, brought yourself into a situation in which you also could cover up financial, physical, relational, sexual, even embezzlement situations in your own life, and no one would know, or if they did, they would be afraid to speak up. There are many who say, I'm responsible for measuring my personal and moral integrity. Could you suffer the same decades-long moral and ethical failures that have now become a spectacle in Ravi Zacharias' situation? I myself have been party to ministries with secrets, with skeletons in the closets. These within themselves are not reasons for those ministries to cease to exist, but the way they were dealt with brings into question whether or not these issues will be repeated, or that instead of there being a airing of the things so that this ministry leader who represents Jesus is redeemed and restored, there was a cover-up and a hope by those who are holding their breaths that there won't be a repeat. Jesus says, "You've heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery." I don't want to speak specifically to the sexual aspects of Ravi Zacharias' situation because of the potency of the sexual desires and motivations and how they sneak up on leaders because they don't deal with the insignificant symbols and signs of their development. You see, Jesus does not say that we should now avoid adultery. You cannot say, wow, I'm doing great, I haven't committed adultery, in a visible way or a way measurable by anyone other than myself and God, because Jesus says we are not attempting to avoid adultery. I say unto you, he said, can't even have something going on in your head where you have sexual delight for someone other than your spouse. See, it's the hidden and insignificant things that Jesus points to, puts his finger upon, the place in your life where if he visited your home, he would go to the room you wish he wouldn't go to and open the closet you wish he wouldn't open, pull out the drawer that you wish he would ignore and say to you, pointing to what's in the drawer, what's this? We don't live in a season of avoiding adultery, therefore saying, I'm a good example. We live in a season when our marriage and intimacy should, in fact, be an example of what God designed intimacy to be in the fulfilling and powerful and securing way that intimacy functions in kingdom covenant marriage. So you ask, how does one remain accountable for the purity of heart that represents Jesus? How does one stay accountable for mental purity and avoid the strong soul connections that ministry leadership often brings, in that we are thrown together with people of the other gender, and that hell is continuously, constantly at work at the pressure points of his known, how he knows, or our known sexual tendencies? How do you maintain clean hands and speech and a pure heart in a culture and a season of history in which whoredom is a constant? It is a norm. Cannot see an advertisement to sell a vehicle without being enticed by the bare thighs of a woman who somehow in the advertisement world is saying to you, see that, and how you're drawn to that. This car has some characteristics or traits that answer to your lust or your sexual desires. Cars don't do that. Hamburgers don't do that. But it is the power and the potency of these deeply felt, deeply seated, designed to be that way, desires that call us back to the security of kingdom covenant marriage. Not that we avoid adultery, but that we are living out the fullness of what God has provided for us. You need someone in your life that you can talk to, who can look you in the eyes and listen to your speech, in which you do not hold back, but you are characteristically honest, sincere, and open in a trusting moment when you know, here's someone who can help me, not destroy me. If you cannot find your deepest accountability in the trustworthiness of your relationship with your spouse, then both of you need intervention. And very often the things you cannot resolve that are essential to your example as a kingdom leader and a representative of Jesus requires the help of other leaders. How can we not be aware of the strength of the sexual aspects of the body and mind, nor ignore how they become targeted leverage points to weaken or destroy our representation of Jesus? And how can we willingly blind our eyes to the fact that hell can discredit Jesus in the minds of hundreds of thousands of people through the moral failures of one or a few kingdom leaders? To avoid sexual delusion, you must begin with the spiritual mind. And one of the most powerful places of security is how we hide in the protection of our spouse. And if here there are irregularities, or the irregularities become a pattern or a norm in which intimacy is not providing us with a covering, not that's the only purpose of intimacy by any means. But if your spouse is not your source of security, your security for your sexual accountability, then get help. Get help immediately. Don't wait. Don't put it off. If the phone draws you away, if what you see flashing on the screen of a computer causes you a moment's difficulty and addresses or identifies a tendency, get help immediately. Do not allow it to drag on for months and years in which the inadequacy of that security provided by your kingdom covenant marriage makes you the target of hellish oppression. Ministry and its stresses often leave us without the emotional energy that we should invest toward one another. This can become a trap. It can become an open door. It can become a big target with a bullseye, and the enemy can hit it so easily and so rapidly and quickly that we can be overwhelmed. He undermines your shield of faith by causing you to lose trust in yourself because you become a bit fearful at the potency of what you just felt when the enemy flashes, when the enemy catches you off guard, when the whisper in your ear or what your eye sees suddenly causes something to go on that you yourself are shocked about. And if you do not have the safe tower in which to run, that your spouse would continue to secure you in that all your sexual delight is satisfied and flowing toward your kingdom covenant marriage. If you lack the fullness of that or have never broken something that was established in your youth, you are on your way to a moment of exposure. Sexual sins begin with smaller, insignificant failures that we leave unaddressed. Because we do not see them as threats, we say that was too insignificant for my concern. But we don't realize that they will build up. They will develop into something more than an insignificant moment or sin. It will develop into a syndrome or pattern that will challenge the greatest and most important treasures of our hearts, therefore, of our lives. We often categorize the very things Satan builds up to leverage us into sexual sin as meaningless until they suddenly blossom. Like flowers in the desert sand with an unexpected rain, they burst out fully functional and the fragrance fills our lives and we are overwhelmed. We think, where did that come from? We're surprised by the suddenness of the flame burning and the jagged edges. Our bodies seem to have developed a mind of their own. And we feel like a ship adrift without an anchor. All of those mixed metaphors I'm using to attempt to address how we get caught we fall into a trap, or we tell ourselves that something is not what it is, even though it can't be anything else. I remember dealing with a pastor married with children, getting too close to a much younger woman in ministry setting until there were moments in which it was all right for them to be together, then all right for them to be alone, then okay for them to be intimate. In which they both said to me at the time, the power and presence of Holy Spirit was so real as we consummated our adulterous intimacy. And I thought, how does someone become so delusioned and stupid that they could say with their own mouth something so inexplicably ridiculous and irrational? And I realized it's because when the insignificant things are not dealt with, and when the accountability is all measured by, designed by, and carried on by yourself, you're in charge and you never submit and surrender to someone else, you can become a complete apostate in your behaviors. It's time to deal with those insignificant issues with such intentionality that the deepest weaknesses that you have attempted to deal with on your own, you're taken to the cross by and in and through the help of the other kinds of elders and fathering leaders God makes available. There are people that God has placed in your life that you can trust. Now, if your marriage is your security, you even then need to position yourself where you can be confronted at any moment by someone with the integrity, who has no leverage points that you have gained in their lives, that you can say, well, he's my friend, but your friend would be the one most empowered to say, I noticed the way you looked at her. I noticed what was going on with your eyes. And I recognize there's something of a tendency. Let's talk about your behaviors. You need that in your life because it is everyone's business how you live, including the intimate details of your sexual expressions. I make this statement and people often gasp because in modern times it sounds so absolutely ridiculous to people. And yet it is so obviously biblical. It is sinful for you to take sexual delight in anyone except your spouse. I'm Dr. Don Lynch, and ministry leaders are representatives of Jesus. Do not allow your strengths to be discredited by fatal flaws or weaknesses that you've avoided to confront. Be intentional with your weaknesses and don't allow the insignificant things to pile up and become the concern or the construction of a shipwreck or a wreckage of both your life, relationships, and legacy. Let's be sharp today with ourselves. Do an inventory and measure the structures of your accountability. Thank you for listening.